I've spoken a lot about Train Fever in the past few months as I've been doing the Transport Tycoon series. I believe that Train Fever is one of the most logical descendants of Transport Tycoon. Basically, this idea of a strategy sort of board game, but reasonably realistic, based, you could argue, on Railroad Tycoon 2 if you go all the way back. Although, the original Transport Tycoon was actually a little bit older than Railroad Tycoon 2, to be fair. But before there was Transport Fever, there was Train Fever. So I figured I'd do Train Fever first, even though in many respects Train Fever was kind of the stopgap while they were developing Transport Fever. They originally crowdfunded it, and it was the very first game released by Urban Games. Urban Games was virtually created to support Train Fever and eventually Transport Fever. And so the story is given here on Wikipedia that they wanted a budget of 300,000 euros, which is actually quite a lot of money when you think about the way games development is nowadays. And, they point out that Transport Fever is basically based on Train Fever. There basically are bigger map sizes and a lot more vehicles, as well as transport types, because Transport Fever has boats, mostly river boats, and aircraft, whereas you don't have those things in Train Fever. Train Fever is actually more than trains. It has trams and road vehicles, and a decent selection of them, actually, including steam vehicles, steam road vehicles. But they're not anything more than support, you could argue. It's realistic because road transport went way up in the era of the railroads because the train stations and the railroad yards were being fed by all the horse-drawn vehicles. So horse use actually went up rather than down in the 19th century as the railways came in. But that's a whole other discussion. So they say the Train Fever team announced that they would seek funding in order to be able to develop the final release of their game. So they had a crowdfunding platform, and they eventually were released by Gamebitious. They were the publisher. And they also published Transport Fever, of course, although not Transport Fever 2. And there's more financial information here on the Wikipedia page. But this is the website for Train Fever. Now, what's a little bit confusing about the website is this is a dedicated website specifically for Train Fever. So they describe Urban Games here, and they talk about, basically these are the founders, Basil Weber, or Weber it would be because he's Swiss, and Urban Weber, and a bunch of other people. And if you go to the home page, they have the news section, as these web pages often do, of course. And the announcement, Transport Fever, officially announced, 2016. So it makes it look as if they're about to go out of business. It doesn't look good for them. They probably should have Transport Fever 2 announced here, because it makes it look like abandonware, which it's not, actually. And the secret to this is that this is not the Urban Games website. This is the Train Fever website. This is the Urban Games website. And they point out they're in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, even though the Train Fever website is based in Germany, notice, which is a little bit strange. And they have the list of games. At the moment, the only ones they're advertising are Transport Fever 2, Transport Fever, and Train Fever. So again, the company seems to more or less exist to support, you could say, the Transport Fever series. It's still basically what they are all about. I mean, they're almost like an independent producer just of one game series. But as you can see, this is, if I'm not mistaken, a screenshot from Transport Fever 2. So it's not photorealistic, but it's very attractive. I certainly like the graphics in the Transport Fever series. And I wanted to add a few more little tidbits of information that I think otherwise would diminish my playthrough if I didn't add this information to answer your questions. So the earliest you can start in Transport Fever and Train Fever is 1850. And you would say, there it is, the year 1850. And you would say that's kind of late to be starting. It's not as late as in Transport Tycoon, admittedly, so you have a little bit more freedom, but it's still a little bit too late, because the Liverpool and Manchester Railway was in 1830. The first steamships were basically at the end of that decade. If you're talking about transatlantic steamships, that was kind of the beginning of the modern era, and telegraphs and so on. The only thing that wasn't out yet basically was commercial aviation. So why 1850? Well, because it's a Swiss gaming company, they chose 1850, I think, because it was in 1847 that the first Swiss railway opened, the Nordbahn. Now, I was a little bit surprised by this. I thought that Switzerland had had railways for longer, in part because their system is so fantastically developed. It's one of the nicest rail systems in the world, arguably, certainly for the purpose it's been built for. And another confusing thing about this is that the earliest locomotive that you can use in Train Fever is basically an earlier variant of this one. So the Spanish Brotli-Bahn locomotive, or the Class D 1/3. In the game it's called a Norris, but I don't think that Norris had anything to do with the development. I don't think, because it says so in Wikipedia here. It says Norris type, so I guess there's something to that. But the actual builder was Maschinenbau Gesellschaft Karlsruhe, and Emil Kessler, who is not associated with Norris, was the engineer who developed it. So if we go jump to the Norris webpage, just for the sake of argument, see, Norris were based in Philadelphia, and they operated between 1832 and 1866. And I don't see any mention here of Kessler. He probably borrowed some design features, but the point is, these were not really genuine Norrises. They were a Swiss product, or really a German product if you want to go by the country of manufacture. Take a look at that railway locomotive works. So, unfortunately, they don't have a picture of it. That's strange. Well, anyway, one more thing we should talk about. I think that the music used in this game is way above average. It's interesting because it seems to be carried on from Transport Tycoon also, because Chris Sawyer is a big Fusion fan, and he made a point of putting period music in at least Locomotion and the newest version of Transport Tycoon. And even in the older versions of Transport Tycoon, he tried to do the best he could to get good composers to contribute MIDI-based Fusion music, which is pretty memorable in pretty much all of the Transport Tycoon games. But for Transport Fever, they hired this guy, Admiral James T., or his real name is David Langard. And he's been playing guitar since 1989. So he's been basically playing guitar as long as me. We both started at around the same time. I don't do any music videos for YouTube, but I know how to play. And he's, photoshopped himself in here 3 times. This is not his band. This is him, He seems to be sort of, maybe not an Elvis impersonator, but somebody who wants you to think that he moonlights as an Elvis impersonator. But his music is nothing like rockabilly. He's basically a fusion artist with, a lot of interesting influences thrown in. So he released the music from the Transport Fever games as the Transport Fever Sessions. And this album, note, has 174 tracks on it. So it's one of the larger albums you can buy. I don't know how many CDs it comes on if you order the CDs. I think he's encouraging people here to download and buy digital album right there. But yeah, so I mean, I didn't want to interrupt the playthrough to talk about the music. I think this is the reason I want to add this section, to point out that this is what we're listening to. I changed my mind about how I was going to approach that. But I think it's worth mentioning this guy because he's an interesting musician and probably way, way overqualified to be doing video game music. Some people even say it's inappropriate for the game because it's too melodramatic for what the game is, essentially, because the game is just, a transport strategy game. It's not really about, I don't know what. It's not the kind of thing that you would expect, somebody like, Admiral James T. or Isaac Hayes or Curtis Mayfield or somebody to do music for. It's basically one of the weird quirks of this game, I guess, that they have this very serious soundtrack, actually, that's listenable. You can actually buy the album. So anyway, I guess I shouldn't talk anymore about the game. I should just go and play it. But I didn't want to gloss over these background facts about the game. Oh yeah, one last thing. I almost forgot one last thing. My original point about this locomotive, the D1/3, they call it the Spanish Brotli-Bon locomotive because the railway was nicknamed that. And it has nothing to do with Spain. It's simply named after a type of pastry that was popular in Baden. And the idea was they were going to open the line to Baden. So that was how it ended up being named that. It had nothing to do with Spain. And that was one of the things that can be kind of confusing when you first try the game. See, the line ran when it was finished from Zurich to Baden. And the fact of the matter is it has nothing to do with Spain. So, on to the game. So anyway, these are some of the links that you normally would find in a Steam game, So you have achievements, of course, which go onto Steam, and you have guides, which are basically instructions for different things that you would want to know about the game. New game is there, of course. Load game is for saved games, of course. And I'm not sure how much there is to say about this. The screenshot there is more or less what the game looks like. And yeah, I'm kind of absorbed, as I've been all along, with the theme song. That main theme song is actually called Disco, even though I don't know if you could really call it a disco song. That's the title of the song, is Disco. And another feature, you have the build down there in the lower right, as if this were a Linux game. There is actually a Linux port, to be fair. This is not the Linux version, this is the Windows version running on Steam. And they give you a little view of the USA DLC there, over on the right, downloadable content. That picture makes it look a lot more realistic than it really is. I'm going to go with the European, standard content because it's much more accurate, at least for Switzerland anyway. And you can see it uses seeds a lot like Minecraft that will generate different worlds for you. This is one I haven't played before. Start year will be 1850, difficulty will be easy, terrain type is medium, which really means hilly. Hilly means very hilly, because it's a Swiss game. And the world size is going to be medium, which in Train Fever terms is not that big at all, actually. You can only really do regional services, you could argue, or even local services with a map size of that class, or those dimensions. The game has been running very fast during my playthroughs. Been loading very fast. Otherwise I'd skip through this. This is just to illustrate that perhaps it's a much faster game than Transport Fever, probably because it's much simpler. There's much less to load, certainly. Train Fever and Transport Fever do use the same game engine. Transport Fever can be a little bit difficult for a computer which is not reasonably new. But both Train Fever and Transport Fever run on my computer. Why are we stuck at 40%? There we go. And we get a black screen, and now what? I know it'll load, it's just that this black screen can stick around for a little while. There we go. So they give an invitation there to the lessons. I'm not going to do the lessons. And there's the map. It looks like it has a graphics error, but really it's because we're too far back. The map has nothing really wrong with it. This style of map, you could argue, was somewhat revolutionary because most transport strategy games made since Train Fever have a map that looks almost exactly like this. So obviously all the Transport Fever games, Railway Empire has a map pretty much exactly like this. And also Machine Key by Jan Zeleny also has this style of map. It's debatable whether when you zoom in the graphics are the same with all of them, but the look when you're zoomed out like this from a high altitude, there's Admiral James T's music playing along there. I'm actually going to save this since I've set it up like this in case something goes wrong. It's only my third game specifically on Train Fever because I've done most of my preparation for this video by playing Transport Fever, actually. Transport Fever is certainly the more complete game of the series, although Train Fever is easier, in part because there's less that can happen. So in any case, getting back to the game here, there is a choice of what language pack to use, and in this case I'm using the English one, which means I get English town names, not German, and not American. These are places I've been in some cases, in England. But what I'm doing here is looking for the biggest town, so that I can build a railway line between the biggest town and maybe the second biggest town. I might not be able to pull it off, actually, but I think if I find a flat stretch of land somewhere, maybe Leyburn can be my big town, even though that's a little bit hard to say. Now notice when you zoom in, the detail is really nice. And what you'll see in a bit, if you look really carefully, you can see there are people on the street, and those are individually modeled, as I've said in previous videos. And this tells you which residents live in that building even.
Huh?
In Transport Fever, they give you more details about their consumer habits. So you can tailor your services to each population, where they generally travel to, whether they have a car, and so on. One thing that is different in Transport Fever is that they have actual names, whereas in Train Fever they just have numbers. So there are some of the people standing on the street there. So you can see this is incredibly detailed. When you consider how far you can zoom out and how far you can zoom in, this is really incredible, in my personal opinion. Viewed in isolation, the graphics are only so-so, but when you consider how many layers of zoom you could do, that's impressive, I think. And the fact that you can analyze how many people live in each building and, so on, that's really impressive too. Simutrans never did anything like that, for example. Now, another thing you can do is you can look at your zoning or your land use. So yellow is leisure, red is commercial, green is residential, and blue is industrial. So you can figure out how people commute. And one of the habits they have in the Transport Fever series, which is somewhat realistic, is that they generally go shopping after work. So you can figure in the morning they go from residential to industrial. In the evening they go from industrial to commercial, and then they might go to leisure, possibly. At least that's typically how they behave. And that's realistic. That's more or less how people go about their day. Another thing that happens is, on the streets that are not occupied by buildings, buildings will eventually be built. So one of the things you can do to improve the economy of a town is to expand the street network, like this. Preferably with large streets. Because the idea is that you can encourage development. Another thing you want to do possibly is, if you can connect the different zones with transit and then connect that transit system with the train station, you will get better business on your railway. At least passenger business anyway. And originally, as the Wikipedia article points out, the plan was for this to be a passenger-only game. It's not actually passenger-only. Now you actually have two choices of garage, or in this case, stable. So you can get a 4-stall or a 2-stall. In this case, we're going to go with the 2-stall, because I'm only going to put in some transit in this city. And the transit, because we're in 1850 and they don't give you trams yet, will have to be basically stagecoaches used as omnibuses. So that's what I'm going to do. So you can put in bus stops. So I'm going to put in a bus stop here in the residential area. You also could do a cargo stop too, but I'm not going to do that. You can see that there in the menu. So one of the things they won't let you do is put a bus stop in an intersection. You have to be off the intersection. So I'll put the bus stop here. And my omnibus will use that stop. I haven't built the omnibus yet, obviously. Just like in Transport Tycoon, you build your vehicles in the depots. So I'll put a stop for the commercial district there. And I'll try to do some kind of circular route around the city, if that's actually possible. I'll change this to a name that will be easier to recognize later. Manor Road could be any number of places on the map, because these street names and transit stop names are randomized more or less. So I'll put, say, Leyburn Manor Road. So I know that it's in Leyburn. And my commercial district stop. I can't decide what I'm going to do with this one. Leyburn Commercial District? Will that fit? Yeah, I'll just abbreviate it. So, just like with Transport Tycoon and Simutrans, they tell you if anybody's waiting, and nobody's waiting yet, partly because there are no services to that stop yet. Now I'll put in some stops in the industrial district. Commuters. And as I said, it is kind of important to think about how the market would work in real life. So you do want to set up routes between residences and employers and commercial districts and so on. You have to presume that your simulated passengers will behave something like the real ones, somewhat. This is really not like most of its predecessors, other than maybe Simutrans. This is a very special advance in transport strategy gaming, you could argue. None of the Railroad Tycoon games did this. So I'm considering putting bus stop there. I guess I will. It could be awkward having more than one stop for the industrial district, but actually the catchment area of one of these stops will not cover the whole industrial district, because this industrial district is reasonably large. I don't have enough time in this playthrough to actually develop it either, because it would make sense to give it a freight yard and feed it with all kinds of raw materials and so on, with freight trains, but I don't actually have enough time to do that, so I'm going to set up, as I said, a basic passenger route between Leyburn and some other easy-to-reach place on the map. And then I'll try to get some profit going, and then I will end the playthrough. Because, unfortunately, even playing the game this way, this is going to take over an hour, which is longer than I originally wanted this to be. I've said this should be a short playthrough, but short is relative, because Train Fever and Transport Fever are deep enough so that they are pretty time-consuming, actually. If you notice a big gap of time between my Simutrans video and this one, that's the reason, is that I had to prepare a very long video, and long videos also require hours of editing. So by the time I finish this, it could be a while from now, actually. Today I'm only going to be doing the gameplay here. So this looks like I might have a semi-decent transit system. I guess maybe I should put in a bus stop for the leisure district there. Question is, where should it go? I guess between these two big buildings here. Because getting the catchment area to reach that other building and all these beer gardens, by the look of it, that's a little bit trickier, I think. So we'll build the omnibus now. Unless there's something I'm forgetting. I mean, that's not going to be a perfect circle through the town, but that should be a decent transport network. It shouldn't be too terrible. Okay, so we'll take this so-called stagecoach, but we're not going to use it as a stagecoach. We're going to use it as an omnibus. Weirdly enough, Train Fever doesn't have an omnibus. They have the modern motor buses later, but they do not have omnibuses. Not at this early stage of the game, anyway. So you have transport lines, in other words, schedules for every service. So it is not like Simutrans where you can choose whether or not to make it a line or make it an individual schedule. If you want an individual schedule, you just create a line that only applies to one vehicle. So, as I said, it's not a perfect circle, but that will have to do for the route of this omnibus. And it says that it only has a passenger capacity of 5, but I know that in this stage of the game, this early stage, it will be hard even to put that many passengers in it. But this is not being done for the money. This is being done to feed the train station once I build the train station. Because the catchment areas of the train stations usually will not reach through the whole town you're building it in. So we also have to make sure that it's moving. I have the game paused, so we're not going to see them rolling out immediately, of course. Now I have to figure out the railway line here, where it's going to go. So we have a kind of flat land between here and I don't remember the name of that town. There's a town there, you can see it in the distance. And it probably makes sense to put the rail line in this plain. Now, one of the things you'll find is that is not as easy as it sounds. First of all, you can't add the stations later. Generally, you have to build a station and connect the tracks to it. And if it doesn't fit, you have to bulldoze some stuff and start over. You do also have to rotate the station, so you use the M and the N keys for that, somewhat unconventionally. Another thing that can help you is if you connect the access road for the station there directly to the existing streets. Because if you do that, what that means is that you don't have to bulldoze any buildings to add your own access road. But as you can see, you sometimes have to add a little fragment in the middle because it won't reach to an unlimited degree without your doing so. So I've put my station in there. I will extend the street there just enough to connect to the access street, I guess you could call it. Access road sounds a little bit rural. And I will want to put in the transit stop there for the omnibus. One feature that is not entirely obvious is you can group the bus stop and the station together as the same stop. So group, see? So give it a name, make sure that they're both selected. So Leyburn, Kings Road, that'll be the station. I'm making sure that they match. Not that it necessarily matters. And I want to get the schedule extended there before I do the grouping. Actually, make sure everything's going to the right place. Okay, so select the station, group, and then I click the bus stop. And there we have it. We have the two stations merged into one. That's a very handy thing to have. Because that way we don't have to worry about whether that bus stop is really feeding the station or not, because the bus stop is the station, as far as the AI of the computer is concerned. So, the next thing, we have to extend the tracks out, obviously. And they give you a speed limit sign there to tell you how fast you'll be able to go on it once it's finished, which is a handy feature. It gives you an idea of like what kind of curves you can really lay and get the speed that you want. 120 kilometers per hour is the limit for wooden ties in Train Fever. Even though In reality, the old Metroliners went 120 miles per hour on wooden ties on the Northeast Corridor in the 70s and 80s. But in Train Fever, you can only go up to 120 kilometers per hour on wooden ties. Now, the tricky thing here is I have to decide whether I'm going to use a viaduct, whether I'm going to use a fill, which is actually more expensive in Train Fever, whether I'm going to put a tunnel there. I want the line to be straight, but I also don't want to make the whole thing trestle or the whole thing a tunnel, because that's very expensive and it will use up my capital before I can actually make any money. And I don't want this playthrough to turn out like my Simutrans playthrough, or my second one, I should say, which I never ended up putting on YouTube. Also, you want to figure out where's the best place to put my station, because if you put it on the edge of the town, you don't have to bulldoze buildings, but on the other hand, you won't have as good a catchment area, so you need to put in transit. Here I'm just trying to follow the lay of the land and not have my track construction costs kill me. I don't know if I made it clear earlier, but when I was talking about the speed limits, when I said 120 miles per hour on the Northeast Corridor, that is actually what I mean. So around 190 kilometers per hour on wood. Not nowadays, but back when they still had wooden ties. The last years of wooden ties in the corridor. So here I can't decide where I'm going to put that station in Hartlepool. We'll see if this works. I am skeptical. Grades can be a problem because they don't adjust the station placement very well. I would argue that this is one of the flaws, not only in Train Fever, but in Transport Fever also. They never completely debugged this problem. It's especially a problem if you build the track and then put in the station later, because generally the track adapts better if you're connecting to a pre-existing station. I don't know about this. I'm going to have to give up and try a different station location. So I'm going to have to bulldoze the track, and I'm going to end up with that ugly, unused cut left there. But one of the things I also know is you don't want to waste money on fixing the ugly stuff. Not initially, anyway, because in the beginning of the game, you don't have enough capital to do very much. So where should this station go? That seems like the real question here. If I put the station there, and again, connect it to the streets, so connect the access path or street or road to the city street. Connects, but the question is, do the tracks connect? So we have this track. If I put it in this way, I get a wooden trestle, and I get a fill, and I get a cut. And it's not completely cooperating with me here. And I want to have as few trestles and other expenses as possible here too. Not just about speed or anything like that. So this says the slope is too high. So really too high for trains is what that means. One of the problems is they don't tell you exactly how to get around that problem. So I cut the tracks out there, even though I don't theoretically have to. In practice, I probably do have to. So I will try to relay these tracks. And I put it in that way, and it fits fine, except I am out of money already. So borrow some money. First borrowing of the game, which isn't too bad. And now that line is actually connected. So I put in a 2-track station. I'm going to want to connect the other track to the main track. I'm not going with a double track main line at this stage, but it is much easier to build a 2-track or even 4-track main in Train Fever than in Simutrans. There's no question about that. Simutrans is a major disadvantage in that regard. Whereas Train Fever and Transport Fever, it's harder to build a 2-track main than in Railroad Tycoon, but that's only because you have to manually put in the signals, really. It does run better than Transport Tycoon and Locomotion and so on, and it definitely handles it better than Simutrans. Okay, so I think that switch is gentle enough, I think. Initially, I'm only going to run one train on this line, so signaling it really heavily isn't really necessary. And my inclination when I have a problem with getting enough signals is sometimes just double track it, triple track it, quadruple track it. And that way, if you handle it that way, then you don't have to worry about the signals as much. Now I've screwed up here, but I think it's because the AI assumes I want to build up a grade, which I do not. I want to just put in the depot somewhere in here, the train depot. And it's tricky figuring out how to do that. So, borrow some money here, because that's all costing me money. This is trickier than it looks, I can tell you that. One other issue is that you can't build a depot without tracks. You can only put in the track and then put in the depot, a little bit like Transport Tycoon and, for example, bus stations. Now, if I put in the track that way, that also looks expensive and unnecessarily elaborate. One cool thing about this, of course, is that they ask you whether you want the green check or the red Do Not Enter button, and the red Do Not Enter button is a cancel button, which can come in handy. So I remove that switch here. I'm going to try something else, because that is not going to work putting it on the right. As crazy as it sounds, I think I'm going to try and put it on the left, even though it looks like the slope there would prevent that happening. So I'll put in a kind of tight switch here, which still you can go 57 kilometers per hour on. Put in another curve here for only 46 kilometers per hour. And there's my depot. Let's see if it works. Yes. So because this is going to be a basic playthrough, it doesn't necessarily matter that that's a position where it could obstruct track construction. And now I'm going to use one of those D1/3 class locomotives that I mentioned earlier. And you have the passenger cars from the Nordbahn, or the Spanish Broadleybahn. And I'll go with 3 at this stage of the game. And I select a line, because I don't have a line for the train. Of course, it will be incredibly simple, because all I have to do is connect the train stations, because there are only 2 train stations, and put them both on the schedule and you have a line. No more complicated than that. Now, question is, what should we do to Hartlepool to get it ready for the arrival of the first train? And I would say it needs a transit system too. Again, not because it will make money, but because it will help to feed train station, which is definitely what we need, especially in the early stages of the game. Many of these passengers walking in the street will simply walk into the train station and get the train. But the catchment area does limit passenger traffic unless you connect the train station with the rest of the city. Again, with transit. Sometimes upgrading the streets can be a little awkward. For whatever reason, the size of the obstacles around the street will sometimes not allow you to put in a full-size street. I'll just put up with it in this case. I'll put in another road depot or garage or carriage house or what have you. And then I will start putting in bus stops in the city. Now the layout of this city is a little bit trickier than the other one. I'll start in an odd place. I'll start in the commercial district here. So that it's also almost in the center of the city too, now that we're looking at it. Not conducive to a circular route, but it is still nevertheless a good place to put a transit stop. Main Road. Huh. I don't usually hear about roads named Main Road. Maybe Main Street. What should I put here? Hartlepool Main Street. Why not? Although in England, of course, they'd probably call it the High Street. Difference in language, basically. And this will not be the downtown either. This will definitely be the city center because, at least in American terminology, the downtown is where the tracks are. And the tracks will not go through the middle of the city. I've already decided because I don't want to lose the business in the middle of the city, nor do I want to spend money buying up the properties, which seem to be already pretty, I don't know, valuable. So I will obviously let the omnibuses run into the city center, but not the trains. Not at this stage. And of course, as the cities develop, both of these cities, they'll probably surround the stations, and then I'll have a city center, or a downtown station in both cities. So it's not all a sacrifice. It's just a matter of waiting for the city to grow. I'm going to want to put probably 2 bus stops in the residential neighborhood, so I'll put one here. Now the reason I'm putting the shelters on both sides of the street is that way the bus or omnibus doesn't have to change lanes to use the stop. And that can become especially useful with trams later, because for a tram, it has to be on the correct side of the road if you only have one shelter. So once you bring in trams, you definitely need shelters on both sides of the street so that both tram tracks will be able to host a stopping service at that stop. And as you can see, they're not very expensive. So that should be a non-issue to make sure there are 2 shelters at each stop. And of course, I almost forgot to put in the bus stop for the train station, which again, I will group with the train station. Mill Road. Mill Road or Hartlepool Station. I'll just say Hartlepool Station. Why not? Group. And I can go the other direction. I can click the bus stop, click group, and click the station. Works both ways. So now I have to build at least one omnibus so that we can connect these neighborhoods together. So I will need a new line. I'll try to make it circular. It'll probably fail, but let's see. This is not simple at all. Now, I knew this would be a little trickier to do than the other one. So 1, 2. Is that going to be 3? Yeah. And we have 4 and 5. I guess. We'll make this one 6. But we've missed commercial, or have we missed the commercial district? Let's take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, not necessarily. Looks like we're where we need to be. So I will say for this road vehicle, omnibus. I'm saying 3. I don't know if that's really supposed to be 3. Planned on doing. Yeah, it's in case I want to put 2 omnibuses in Leyburn. But I can't decide if I want to do that. Now, for a freight route, we're too early on to put trains in, but we could try to put in wagons. So we have a refinery here, so if we can find an oil field, we can connect a wagon route from the oil field to the refinery, and then from the refinery to one of the industrial districts in the towns. Now, this is a coal mine, I believe, yes. So that is not useful to us at this stage. The selection of industries in Train Fever is somewhat limited because there was never any original plan to have any freight in Train Fever. That was something that the various beta testers and fans insisted they had to add, and so they did. It's much better implemented in Transport Fever. So I have to decide, what else am I going to do? If I'm going to put in a freight wagon service between those refineries and those oil fields, how am I going to do that? Let's see. It's a hard call. Of course, when I put in the oil refinery run, I don't think that's going to connect necessarily to one of the towns with the railway. It could easily end up being just any old town. Bournemouth there, that would be practical. So there's a refinery, and we have an oil field over on the right. So we could run the crude oil through the town, or past the town, to the refinery, and then the refined oil back to the town before returning empty to the oil field. So let's see how that would work. So the land use, click cargo, but the cargo doesn't really seem to do very much in terms of telling you where it is. So the industrial building has 4 jobs, so you can match those up with the commuters, of course. But in this case, I'm just seeing if any of these buildings specifically, or explicitly, that was the word I was looking for, demand refined oil. And it's hard to find, actually. I know that I'm going to want transit in this town if I'm going to be doing trade here, but putting in a basically freight station or a truck station, truck terminal, is necessary, even though I don't have any trucks. I will have wagons. I don't know what you would call it. A haulage depot? I'm not sure. And then we need another road depot just so that we're not sending in wagons from elsewhere in the virtual country here. And we build a horse wagon. New line. It valves. I think it's just as straightforward as running a freight service from the oil field to the refinery. I think. I mean, I also need to put in the freight depot at the oil field and at the refinery, because I don't have it yet. So I'll put in a truck terminal exactly like the one in town, if I can fit it. Irritatingly, this doesn't look easy. It's also unclear whether this is getting within the catchment area, because normally the way you ensure that is you connect the access road for the industry with the road that you're going to be running the wagons or trucks on. But this oil field appears to have no access road, which somewhat problematic. I can't be assured that I'll be able to get any products. Or in this case, raw materials. Yeah, see, if I move the street closer, it doesn't work. So I guess I just have to settle for this and hope for the best. And then I need another depot at the refinery. The streets look like they're not there, but those little dirt paths are in fact usable by wagons. That should be no problem. So if I put in a truck terminal as close as possible to that refinery, there we are. So, add station. Sometimes you have to use this add station button. So there's the oil field, there's the refinery, and I guess the third stop will be that truck terminal in the industrial district. And then there probably is no choice but to run empty back to the oil field. Now I think I might also want to possibly rename these. So Bournemouth Haulage or Haulage Yard. Trying to be horse era in my language here. I don't know if that's a good name for it. Horse-drawn truckers were sometimes called teamsters in America and sometimes hauliers in England. And of course, teamsters today could be truckers, especially if they are in a union. Now, what am I going to do here? Let's see. Bournemouth South. Well, this is not what I mean. Bournemouth Refinery. It's not even south. I don't know what they're talking about. So, should I just let it go? This is the question. I guess I will. I guess I'll let the wagon go. Now, whether I really want to do transit in Bournemouth, I can't decide. So this is the status of all my vehicles. So I think maybe train number 1 should stay train number 1. Road vehicle 2 is my oil wagon. Road vehicle 1 is my omnibus 1. I think maybe having omnibuses 1 and 2 is really better than having 1, 2, and 3. Especially because early in the game, I'm not going to have enough passengers to fill 2 buses and I'll just hemorrhage money out of them. So it'll be 1 and 2. Yeah, it's saying that it should be hauling coal, but that's totally wrong. Now, I know that in Transport Fever, when I've run into this problem, it's corrected itself once it goes to the place for the pickup. The origin of the route, you could argue. So I will not panic about that yet. It's annoying, but it probably won't stop it picking up anything. So, is it started is a question. Is everything in there? Vehicle replacement I'm not going to get to in this playthrough because you have to have the vehicles for a while for that to be worthwhile. So full load. I guess I want a full load at the oil field. You can fine-tune the schedules as you can see here. avoid empty running or almost empty running. It's much more of a good idea with the freight services and the passenger services, of course. So let's call it something other than Road Vehicle 2. Bournemouth Oil Wagon. Alright, so what should I do now? Hard call. I guess I will put in transit. I guess, maybe. So if I figure out a good place to put the transit stop in this industrial district. Actually start with the industrial district, even though the traffic will be coming from the residential district. We'll call this Bournemouth South Street. I'm not in the mood for imagination today. And logically, where should the next one be? Maybe commercial district, just because the commercial district is in the same line of travel, if you will. So I'll put it here, because I want it to be on the route to the residential area. Of course, ideally, you probably want to reverse the order of these, but I'm not being too much of a perfectionist, simply because this game is only the first in the Transport Tycoon series, or rather the Transport Fever series, and it is not going to be anywhere close to the most powerful or the most desirable. So I'll upgrade the street here. If I loop it around there, maybe? Yeah, see that? Then I can loop it through here, even though that wasn't part of the AI's plan for it anyway, not in the short term. And I'll put a station in there too, a bus stop there too. Again, I think because I need it. So, Bournemouth, Victoria Road. And we'll put another stop up here. Generally, the darker colors, as I understand it, are, I don't know, less profitable. But notice that the lighter colors are kind of in inconvenient locations in terms of the catchment area. So I'll connect these streets here, again, to encourage development. And maybe I should put a bus stop for the leisure district. Bournemouth New Street. Those are my lines again. For each vehicle, really. Actually, it's my list of vehicles with the lines. So I guess I need a stagecoach to use as an omnibus again. I guess this will actually be my Omnibus 3. I was not originally planning on putting omnibuses in a third city, but I guess I will. I don't know how much use this is going to be. I suspect this might be one of my least profitable ones and least useful ones, but at least I'll have the infrastructure in there in case I need it later. Worst case scenario, I guess I could scrap the stagecoach and see if these stops are any use later. How is this going to work? Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. That is tricky. 5. Okay. Up the street, back down again. 1, 2, 3. Four. Maybe 5 again. It doesn't look right. I guess if it works, it works. It just psychologically it seems like it's wasting a lot of energy. Can I do this better? That's the question. Okay, put 5 in there. Yeah, it's still not the greatest thing in the world, but it might bring in some money and it might help me with catchment area for the station later, if I build a train station there. So, is there any other freight business or anything else I can exploit here is the question. My inclination is to say probably not. Let's see, so I'll deactivate my color-coded zoning there. Wonder if I can just start it and just watch the trains run. Let's see. I should probably save after all this work. That's the first thing I gotta do. So, third game. Still today. Part 3 this time. And if anything goes wrong, I can go back to the saved game, but I don't think that's going to happen. As I said, Train Fever is easier than Simutrans, or I would say even Transport Fever. So let's go. Let's see how it goes. Play, and the locomotive comes out of the depot. The graphics are kind of a mix of mediocre and good, but I wouldn't say that any of the graphics in this are ugly. A lot of the graphics look like computer graphics. You can make that criticism. It's not really a photorealistic game, even if it's a nice 3D game. Okay, so firstly I need to bring the train into the station, and it'll flip around the other direction, just like in Transport Tycoon and Railroad Tycoon. It's one of the unrealistic but useful features of this. You see that passenger subway on the platform? That is actually functional. The passengers actually use that. But my train is empty because the service is brand new and nobody thought to walk over to the station to take the train. So I guess we'll follow this train. Now in Transport Fever, they allow you to get a cab from the driver or engineer's perspective. And for private cars, you get to see the driver's perspective. If you click on a potential passenger, you get their perspective as they walk around the town. Although, strangely not when they're on the transit, because you switch to the transit view in that case. But in Train Fever, none of that exists. If you're going to follow something, the best that it'll let you do is simply follow it on the map, not follow it as if you're actually a participant. So, here the train is going into the only tunnel I've put in so far. And notice it says it's going 40 kilometers per hour. In this game, 40 kilometers per hour is the fastest that locomotive can go. Which actually is pretty prototypical, actually. Most trains in the 1840s couldn't muster too much better than that in service. Top speed's another story, but generally the service speeds of trains were less than that in those days. Okay, so out comes the train, and it's still crawling through the, I guess, Swiss countryside here, trying to get to the other station. And if I look at my list of vehicles, nothing is making a profit. But that's because it's too early in the game, only 3 months in. Now, weirdly enough, they start you in April of 1850, not January. And by the time I paused it to talk to you, it was already April 15th. So now I'm off to July 31st, and then August 1st. And obviously that's not to scale with what you're watching on screen, because essentially a day passes every 2 seconds. But the trains, animation-wise, look like they're going realistic speeds. Although it takes them days to get places that in real life would take about as long as you're seeing here. Not much time at all, even at 40 kilometers per hour. So, this is taking a really long time. Not a fast train, of course, but like I said, it would have been nice for the 1840s. And on it goes, and on and on. I think I'm going to speed up the time scale when we do the return trip, because this is a waste of your time. We just want to see how this works. But it's slowing down for the curve there, or possibly for the grade. More likely the grade. Because this curve is very reasonable. So we're almost there. So we have some passengers on the platform, and the only place they could be going is Leybourne. Because that's the only other stop. So we pull in the train. And in case you didn't notice before, the doors open, and the doors don't shut until the train's ready to leave. The train reverses direction, unrealistically. Doors are shut, and the train departs. for Leyburn Kings Road Station. So some of the passengers missed their train there from the look of it. And we look at the vehicles again. We did not make a profit on that run because we didn't have any passengers. And the omnibuses are struggling also, which, as I said, is unsurprising because it's not the money that you build them for. You build them for the catchment. The extension of the station catchment for the train station. You can also make money with them depending on the route you're running them on, but obviously it's much easier to make a profit with buses once you have access to buses. Here's that ugly cut there I had to give up again. And my passengers are disappearing off the train. This is one of the few bugs I've read about in Train Fever, is that your passengers disappear en route without there being any stations. Train Fever gets some criticism for bugs, but my own experience is the bugs are relatively few. It's pretty well made from the get-go. Transport Fever is better, but that's to be expected. It's an improvement on Train Fever. Train Fever does run better than the reviewers say it does, in my experience. So there, that red amount is an expense being deducted. That's the train costing me money. So it goes into the tunnel again. And we'll emerge from the tunnel much faster because the time scale is now scaled up. There it goes. It makes it look like a modern train almost. And zooming along, zooming along. And I will slow to normal speed again so we can watch this. My prediction is I will make some money and I will pick up a full load of passengers to go to Bournemouth. Or not Bournemouth, Hartlepool. I get them confused. So we made some money. Is it a profit? For now, yes. I'm in profit for this one train. It's good news. But not in overall terms. I'm in profit for the short term of that train, not the long term. Average it out and I'm still losing money. So I have to do the next run to see if I can pull it into profit. If I'm lucky, some of those omnibuses will finally start to make money because notice Omnibus 2 just got a full load and it just jumped into profit. It picked up 5 passengers, dropped off 2. Now it has 3 aboard and it is in profit. That's nice. Even though it wasn't the reason that I introduced it. One thing I should note is that the trains do make a lot more money when run properly than the horse-drawn vehicles do, in line with real life. So if you think that that's easy money, it is and it isn't. Depends on how much money you want. If you really want to get the high scores in this game, you need trains, definitely. Because it's Train Fever. Why else would it be? The reason. What else would be the reason for that? So, the train is about to pull in to Hartlepool Station, and we will see what kind of results it gets. Okay, so now it's more firmly in profit, and according to the overall profit, it is also in profit. Now I have the Omnibus 1 and Omnibus 3, which are not making money, and I have the Bournemouth Oil Wagon, which is not making money. Now one of the problems with this is that when done in the most conventional way, if you want to get rid of any of the unprofitable services, you have to send them back to the depot and then retire them. Now I am going to save this just in case something goes wrong at the last minute, I guess. Now I'll put it off. I'll play this to the end. Why not? I don't think I have too much further to go. My balance is now in positive numbers because I was slightly in debt for a short time there. But if we look at the company finances, the company as a whole is still slightly in a loss. So I guess the logical goal to conclude the playthrough will be to get it just about into profit. Because I'm not going to make this a long play, even if it seems like a long play, given that we've been going for over an hour now. So the train is heading down the line there. Still only have Omnibus 2 and Train 1 making money. My losses are actually deepening. That's not good. But I know that it can get around that somehow. I think I'm going to send that coal wagon to the depot. It's not making any money because no oil, I should say, is being transferred to it. How is it going to make any money? I guess maybe it's too early in the game, or the catchment area of the oil field is not connecting to that terminal. Road vehicles obviously aren't supported as well in Train Fever as in Transport Fever. Okay, so the train pulls in. I'll send that right into the depot. So what happened with the train? Well, we made a little bit more money, and the company is now in profit. So I guess that's it. There it is, $65.7 thousand profit. I guess I will conclude any second here. Thanks for watching. Well, we'll save it, and then I'll say thanks for watching. This is third game. 10th of May 2021, Part 4. Save. Thanks for watching.